Okay, welcome to the video. SIG Guy here. This is just going to be a quick video on a new toolkit that I put together. I'm calling it the 320 D.A.R.K, the 320 Disassembly and Reassembly Kit. It's basically the punches and picks that I use to disassemble and reassemble the FCUs in my 320. So let's get started. All right, before we get started, just to go over the changes, why the change and what has changed. Basically, the manufacturing tolerances in the pins themselves varied from pin to pin. Some were bigger than others, some were smaller than others. And then some of the holes in the FCU, some are bigger, some are smaller. And I feel like some of the holes aren't lined up perfectly straight across from each other. And what I mean by that is I could take one of the picks and go through one side of the FCU, then go through the sear or the safety lever, and then go to push it through the final side of the FCU. And sometimes it's really tight. You'd have to like twist the pin to get it to go through. If you took that same pin and flipped it around the other way, it would go fine through the the front side, go fine through the safety lever or the sear, and then you'd have to twist it to go through the final hole there. So the pins in the gun itself are a little bit smaller than the old punches, so I made the new punches more along the same diameter as the pins. That way they slide in and out no problem. Instead of millimeters, 3, 4, and 2.5 or 365 on the punches, I did a small, medium, and large. Medium, large, small. And then I use a pick to disassemble my 320. Not everybody has a pick laying around. It makes it so much easier. So I wanted to include a pick in the kit as well. So let's get into disassembling the 320 FCU. As always, we're going to make sure we're working on a safe firearm. So we're going to remove our magazine. And typically, as a rule of thumb, I never even have magazines on my bench, nor do I have ammo. The only reason why it's in this one now is because I'm going to do a functions check on the 320 when we reassemble. So we're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to make sure, physically and visually check to make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine. Check our breech face, look away, do the same thing again. Chamber, magazine, breech face, safe firearm. So we're going to rotate our takedown lever, release our slide, remove our takedown lever, and then we're going to remove our FCU from our grip module. So my first step is I remove the trigger bar, and the trigger bar spring. And how I do that is I lift up, out, and around on my trigger bar in the rear here. Pull it up out of the sear housing and bring it up and around. That brings my trigger forward. Allows me to slide it right out of there. And then I'm just going to grab my trigger bar, rotate that back like that, and remove the spring. This way puts no stress, or you're not torquing the spring at all, your trigger bar spring, and deforming that so it doesn't work properly towards the end. So that's the first step. And then I'm going to use my large punch here. I'm just going to use that to push out my slide catch pivot pin there. And then we'll tip this upside down so we don't lose our spring and little buffer that's on the end there. We'll put that aside here. And I'm going to use the small punch to push my trigger stop pin to the side just like that. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to remove my takedown safety, which is this bar right here. And to remove this, I'm going to actually push down on it. It's upside down right now. Push that to the side so it's in there diagonally now, just like that. I'm going to hold that with my finger. I'm going to use my punch, and there's a spring right here in this little window, and I'll show you clearer when I get this all apart. What I'm going to do with my punch is I'm going to grab as far forward on that spring and pull it back, and that's going to relieve the tension against a leg from this bar that goes down into that slot. Okay, and then I can pull this bar right up and out of there. So I'll put this down here like this, and reach as far forward as possible, pull that spring back, and then just lift that right up out of that slot. So you can see the little leg right here. That spring is pushing right against this leg, pushing it forward. And the spring that we're talking about is right here. Okay, so I'm just grabbing as far forward as I can with my pick, pulling it to the rear like that, and then that will come right up and out of there. So I have two pins left here. I got a small one and a large one. The small one is our sear pivot pin, and the large one's our safety lever pivot pin, okay? And to go over our pins here real quick, we have our trigger stop pin right here. Mine stays in there. I can pull mine right out. Mine's been out a million times. Yours might stay there, and you can't get it out, which is fine. You can leave it right there. You don't need to force that out. And it's actually a pretty good reference because all your pins go from left to right when you're putting them in, and they'll go from right to left when you're taking them out. So even your slide catch, remember, we removed it this way. So it's actually a pretty good reference on which way your pins go. You might get confused when you're reassembling this at the very end. All right, so we have these 2 pins here. We're going to push them from right to left. I'm going to use my small punch, or excuse me, my medium punch, to remove our sear pivot pin, which is the small one right here. We're just going to push that straight through just like this. There's our pin. And as you can see how easy those slide through now. I'm going to put my finger over there because there's a spring under there. I don't want it to pop up. And then I'm going to take my large punch and remove the safety lever pivot pin, which is this big one right here. Same way. And again, you can see how nice and smooth those go in there. Okay, so I'm going to remove my punch. I'm going to flip this over just like that. And then we have our safety lever, our sear, and our sear spring. Yours probably has 2 springs in there. And that's it. It's that easy, taking this whole thing apart. You can remove the sear housing if you want. It's going to take a regular punch when you can use it with a hammer. Don't use a hammer on these because you're going to break the handles. But you drift this pin out right here. It comes out pretty hard, but it does come out. And you're going to want to get a replacement pin when you put it back together. You can take that sear housing out, that little spring out right here, and then your disconnector if you want. You really don't need to go that far unless you're replacing that stuff. This is plenty far enough to get in there and clean that stuff all thoroughly. So clean your stuff up, and then I'll show you how to reassemble the 320 FCU using the pin kit. All right, so reassembly is kind of where the magic is with the pin kits and the tool kits that I put together. Some guys have really big meat hooks, and they can't see what they're doing. The pins are so small. These aren't even very small pins. These are pretty large compared to a lot of pins in firearms. So when you're trying to line up stuff, you can't see what you're doing because your hands are in the way. When you have your punches there, your hands aren't even in the way at all. You can line stuff up. And then these act as like slave pins. What I mean by that is a lot of stuff comes pre-assembled with a slave pin in it. And then you take your factory pin, push out the slave pin, and it makes it a lot easier on reassembly, a lot of this stuff. So the first thing we're going to do on reassembly is our safety lever, which is this weird looking one right here. And again, if you aren't following along or go too fast, just check out one of my other videos on my YouTube on reassembling. We have a big hole here, and then we have the big hole in the side of our FCU. So what I do is I just kind of lay this on this side here, and I look down through the hole, and I try to line up that big hole with the holes in the FCU. And then I'm going to take my big punch, and I can see through the holes. I'm coming right up through the bottom, just like that. And then basically my safety lever is right where it needs to be. Okay, so that's pretty easy. And then I'm going to take my big pin, and this is going to act like a slave pin now. I'm just going to push that out with the big pin, just like that. Okay. So that's all installed where it needs to be. And then sometimes your pins are pretty loose in there, so just kind of keep your finger on them so when you're tipping it over like this, they're not falling out. Same thing with my sear. Okay, I'm going to drop the spring right down in that back hole. And on your sear, you have this hole right here in the front. That's going to line up with this hole here. So as I'm sliding it in the same way as I just did my safety lever, I'm watching those holes, lining them up. And I'm going to take my medium punch. Same thing, I'm coming up through the bottom. I'm going to rotate it around so I can get it through my sear. Just like that. Do a little quick functions check, make sure it's moving. It's positioned where it needs to be. I didn't go below the hole or above the hole or whatever. And then again, I'm going to use my pivot pin to push my punch out. I'm going to get it started just like that. And just push it straight through. Okay. And that's it. That stuff's reassembled. It is that easy. Our next step in reassembly is we're going to tackle this takedown safety lever. Okay, this is the one with the weird leg on it that goes in the slot. But first we need to pull that spring to the rear to allow room for that leg to go inside the slot, okay? So we're going to kind of pre-position this, just like how it came out. I was at an angle in there. The leg is pretty much where it needs to be. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pick. I'm going to get that leg out of the way, and I'm going to grab as far forward on that spring, pull it back. That'll allow room for the leg to drop down inside, okay? I'm going to grab the front of the spring, pull it back, put my lever in the hole. I'm going to push down, let go of my spring, and that usually just pops right back into place where it needs to be. And then I can actually push my pin back into place right there. Next, what I'm going to do is my slide catch. You can do either your trigger bar, and trigger bar spring, or the slide catch. It does not matter. I'm going to put my slide catch in. You put this in upside down so the spring doesn't fall out. Lining up this hole right here. And then dropping my pin in. Make sure you put your pin in from left to right. If you don't put your pin in, if you put it in this other side, it's going to interfere with our trigger when our trigger's in the side. So just put that in and slide that all the way. Functions check, works fine. Okay. So now we're going to do our trigger bar, and trigger bar spring. And the easy way that I do this is I put this weird little leg through the hole, like that. Hold that with my finger, just like that, kind of pinch it. Put the hook on the spring through the back side of this eyelet here, just like that. And then I rotate this up and around, making sure that this leg here stays behind the sear housing, okay? As I'm rotating that into position. So it's behind the sear housing, and I'm pushing down on this part here, flat against this surface. If it's up on this surface, you're not far enough forward. It's got to be down on this surface, okay? And then I can put my trigger in, and this is actually, in my opinion, the hardest part of this whole step, or the whole process. The pin here through the trigger bar hole, depending on how tight this cavity is. Sometimes it's a pain in the butt to line up. So you got to line that up, and then you got to get the pin here through the hole on this side here. Excuse me, this side here. All right, so lining all that stuff up, it usually drops right in. Other times you got to fidget with it a little bit. So I'm moving my trigger bar around, getting it to line up with the hole in my trigger. And then I'm pushing with my finger this way, but it won't go all the way through because it's not through the hole here yet. So what I need to do is just kind of move my trigger, rotate it, and push at the same time, and then it'll go through flush right there. And you can see my trigger bar is sandwiched between the trigger and the FCU. So that's in there fine. Now all I need to do is just kind of guide this leg here on my trigger bar out and around and drop it inside the sear housing here. And then at the same time I push on the trigger with my finger here to help bring it forward. Just like that. So that doesn't twist and torque and distort your trigger bar spring at all. So the last thing we need to do is just reassemble. So we're going to put our FCU in, put our takedown lever in, center our guide rod, reinstall our slide, rotate our takedown lever, release our slide. Okay. So now that we're all done with that, I'm going to make sure that I'm free and clear again because we're going to be pulling the trigger. Make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine, breech face. I know we just had it all apart, but you can't be too safe. So I'm going to release my slide, install my magazine, release my magazine, make sure it falls out under gravity, which it does. So I'm going to rack my slide, pull my trigger, fires, rack my slide, reset, fires, rack my slide, take it out of battery, dead trigger. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm moving my slide slightly back to see if my disconnector pushes down on my trigger bar, which it does. Okay. So everything passes the functions check. And there you go. That is the 320 disassembly and reassembly kit. I'm a firm believer if you have the right tools, it makes the job so much easier and quicker to accomplish. So this is basically the deluxe pin alignment kit with different size pins, and I added a pick to it as well. So what I did on this one is you can still choose what colors you want. There's 11 different colors to choose from for each 3 different sizes. A lot of people like that function, so I wanted to keep it that way. On the 365 kit that I introduced a couple weeks ago, it's got the green 365 punch there with an all metal punch, which is used to reset the sear, and a pick in that kit as well. Super easy to disassemble and reassemble the 365. And then I'm waiting on one more piece to put together the classic line disassembly and reassembly kit. This will be the same thing. It's got 2 different punches in there, kind of similar to these, different sizes, and then you'll be able to choose the colors for those as well. Okay, so these are all available on SIGguy.com. I have Armorer's blocks on there as well. I have tons of different upgrades for 320s, 365s, and classic SIGs as well. If you are not a follower or a subscriber on my YouTube channel, there should be a subscribe button right down here. If you could smash that baby, I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you for watching and have a good day.